Venom: The Last Dance is the third installment of the Venom films telling the story of Eddie Brock on the run from the law and from an extraterrestrial threat. It's pretty action-packed, but like the previous movies, it's pretty subpar. Let's talk about it. This movie picks up right where things left off in the credits scene of Spider-Man: No Way Home, where Eddie Brock gets sent back to his home universe. He carries on as a fugitive because of the events of Venom: Let There Be Carnage, and he's trying to make his way to New York City. Venom is also being hunted by monsters sent by the symbiote god Null because he holds the key that would allow Null to escape his planet, which would spell disaster. So it's interesting because Eddie and the Venom symbiote are both on the run from their respective worlds. They have both been cast out as one lost entity. It's a poetic way of illustrating how they each have nothing left but each other. Throughout the movie, it repeatedly suggests, sometimes without explicitly stating so, that perhaps they should split up. This is emphasized by how difficult Eddie's life has gotten because of his affliction. He has to grapple with things like guilt and the envy of seeing others live rich lives. The relationship between Eddie and the symbiote, once again, is the movie. They do a great job of making them feel like separate characters. The dissonance between them is like 80% of what makes the movie interesting. The Jekyll and Hyde-esque relationship they have comes off as petty, but it does make up the bulk of the movie's friction. This is furthered by Tom Hardy's perfect physicality. He's always done an outstanding job looking like a guy who actually isn't in control of his body. The ways that he acts jolted is what really sells it. Along with our protagonist, the movie is carried by the action. It does have some long periods where the action is kind of absent, but when it's at peak action, the movie can be really awesome, especially in the obligatory third act CGI heavy battle. It's a really dope scene and probably the only thing that would actually make me want to rewatch this movie because it has some issues. I was not a fan of the previous Venom movies, and this one really isn't much better. The thing that frustrated me the most here, oh my god, was the exposition dumping so bad. The first act has so much dialogue where a character is saying something to another character that that character already knows. They're vicariously telling us so that we know what's up, but it makes for utterly atrocious and unrealistic dialogue. For example, there's this one scene where Rex and Dr. Payne, played by Juno Temple, are walking through Area 51 and taking an elevator ride. This is some of the worst dialogue I've heard since Madam Web. They're just talking all about the facility and what they each do. Rex says something like, yes, we catch the symbiotes and you study them. So this is a bit of a road trip movie, but with minimal travel shenanigans that we typically see with the subgenre. He has plenty of encounters, but they're not really influenced by location because there aren't very many locations, with the exception of landing in Las Vegas. More than anything, it plays out like a fugitive story. It jumps back and forth between Eddie, who's on the run, and Rex and the Area 51 crew, who are all trying to chase Venom down. With the dual POVs, it sometimes felt like Venom's story was being bogged down by everything happening at the symbiote lab with Rex and Dr. Payne. There are some interesting things going on at this lab, but they're not very impactful, making the scenes away from Venom feel kind of like intermissions. They sort of tried to make Dr. Payne a bigger player in the movie. Sort of. They give us a glimpse of her backstory and why she decided to do what she does. It was definitely the right call to make one of the characters at the lab feel like a bigger player, since that's who we follow when Venom's off screen. But they did not do nearly enough to make her the bigger player that they wanted her to be. They gave us a little bit of her backstory, but beyond that, she feels like little more than a two-dimensional character. They much later in the movie tried to circle back to that backstory with a single line of dialogue. Apparently that's all they thought was necessary to make her feel like a big character. With how uneventful things were when the camera was on her in the lab and not Venom, it would have made a monumental difference if they had focused more on her complexities and her conflicts. Emphasis on conflicts because there is a little bit of friction at the lab, but it's very minimal, and it honestly just felt like an afterthought because they realized that there was nothing interesting about those characters. And that describes a lot of this movie. It does the bare minimum to try and make its subjects and themes work. The plot of this movie had room to weave in some interesting themes, particularly with the dichotomy of Eddie and the symbiote staying together versus breaking up. It would have been cool for them to dig into the loneliness of feeling cast out a little more, and the things that Eddie's given up in the other movies and how that's affected him. The movie casting them out and floating the idea that it's impractical for them to carry on together should warrant Eddie getting low, but it just doesn't feel dark or complicated. The idea of making the story darker or sadder would fit harmoniously with this character who is scourged by a demon-like alien parasite. But of course, that is not the path they've gone with the Venom brand here. They continue down the path of making these movies like kids' cartoons. The relationship between Eddie and the symbiote is more often than not reduced to a noisy joke, and this really got old 2 movies ago. so much less humor would be so much more. For example, in Let There Be Carnage, in that first scene where Eddie meets Cletus and on his way out, the symbiote says,
"What a dick."
That was a funny joke that I laughed at along with the rest of the theater because it was both surprising and subtle. You follow that with a long and obnoxious cooking scene and the movie just feels like Nickelodeon. This movie kicks things off with another noisy scene like that cooking scene, and that's how they decide to set the tone for this movie. But that's the Venom movies. They forego things like character depth and subtlety in favor of spectacle and things that look good in trailers because Sony only cares about selling tickets. Hence why they cast Rhys Ifans in this movie, so that we can see him in the trailer and think, oh, is he playing Lizard? Or, oh, can't wait to see what multiversal play is afoot. Just like the Spider-Man graffiti in the Morbius trailer, they clickbaited us again because they are just shameless. This movie has other bits that feel like little more than marketing decisions. For example, Mrs. Chen is back for this movie. Her inclusion in this movie is very contrived, and the only value it got from her is the silly little dance scene that didn't really need to be in it. It's a movie that doesn't really care about the hows and whys. It does have some cool subject matter, like the Venom horse is really only a taste. I also appreciated their attempts at trying to make this movie a little bit more sentimental, but in the end, it just feels like another generic and kind of dumb superhero movie. So the movie overall is just lacking. It's not completely terrible, but if you did not like the first two Venom movies, this is not going to be the one that changes your mind. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of Conclave.